Welcome to the Care Right podcast, your go-to resource for all things elder care. Guiding us through this journey is Annalee Kruger, the founder of Care Right Incorporated, and she has been steadfastly supporting families across the United States. Each episode brings you expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical advice, ensuring that you're well equipped to provide the best possible care for your loved ones. Expect to gain valuable knowledge, learn from real-life stories, and get inspired to take action in your own caregiving journey. So buckle up as we dive into an in-depth discussion of elder care planning and together embrace the journey of caring for aging loved ones on the Care Right podcast.
Hello, everyone. My name is Annalee Kruger. I'm the owner of Care Right Incorporated. We work with families across the country in developing customized aging plans. Usually who contacts Care Right is the adult son or daughter who might have found themselves thrust into the role of family caregiving of aging parents and now are realizing this isn't the right fit or it's not sustainable. And you're starting to feel the emotional, physical, and financial and relationship impact of being a family caregiver. Our aging plans are customized for each family that we work with, but the long and the short of what an aging plan is helping the family facilitate family meetings, finding out what's working well, what's not working well, what are the goals. Mom and dad's goals are usually age in place at home, not be a burden to their kids. Kids' goals are usually we want our parents to be safe, happy, have the best quality of life and the best quality of care possible. The only way to accomplish those goals is through aging planning and finding out what care might be needed now, and certainly what care can we anticipate down the road. So we help families sort out what their care options are, how to pay for care, and then also do family mediation for those families who have strained relationships. We also do virtual patient advocacy so that you as a family can just be the son or the daughter or the spouse and not have to be the care patrol, the care advocate, the care manager, and the care coordinator. So we become on your team to help make sure that your family has the best aging and caregiving and dementia progression journey possible. So part of our Caregiver Crisis podcast is educational content for all of you family members and professionals out there across the country. So I'm always excited when I have really cool people on as guests who are doing really cool and different things. And so Dr. Jim Gambone is no different than our other guests. They're all doing amazing things. But what I think is really cool about Dr. Jim Gambone is he's taken a look at caregiving specifically from a male perspective. So there's all sorts of stuff out there, all sorts of resources about caregiving in general, but your focus is about what caregiving is like from the man perspective. So without further ado, how would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Well, thanks, Annalee. How would I introduce myself? I call myself a person that carries a multi-portfolio career. So I have a number of different careers that I engage in. One is I'm a college professor, and I've taught in the field of aging, gerontology, and public health over the last 30 years of my academic career, but usually as a part-time professor. I've been a film and television writer, producer, and director for almost 27 years. I also am a published author and have written a number of books besides the one that we'll talk about today. And I've done a lot of national and international speaking on issues related to generations and how different generations are different from each other. And part of the uniqueness of the book that I'll talk about is the fact that it takes a generational look at male caregiving too, saying that not only do men care differently than women, but also different generations of men care differently from each other. And so this book came about as part of my academic work. I was teaching in a class on aging and issues in aging. And one of the issues we were covering was caregiving. This is a graduate class, a master's degree class that I was teaching at Capella University. And in the class, a woman submitted a paper. And she said in the paper that 40% of all informal caregivers were men. And that sounded really strange to me because I had never heard that statistic before. So I challenged her and I said, well, I'm not sure if I trust that statistic. So I'm going to do some research. You do some more research, come back with some better facts, and we'll talk about it. So in my research, I found out she was pretty correct. The most of the data was around between 34 and 36% of the informal caregivers are men, but even that was different and much larger than I had even thought it was. Even though personally I had been involved in a caregiving role with my mother, helping my mother take care of my grandmother when I was younger as a support caregiver to my mom. So I had some real understandings of that, and I had gone through 2 deaths of 2 very good friends of mine who both died of ovarian cancer, 2 women that died of it. And I was the support and helping caregiver for the husbands in both cases. And so this was something that I was deeply interested in on a personal level. But then I asked the woman, I said, well, have you noticed in your research if there are any resources that are actually directed specifically towards men? And she said, no. And I said, well, that's funny because in my research, I didn't see any either. It seemed like almost all the caregiving books were written by women. A lot of them are very good, excellent resources and things that were helpful for men and women. But the fact is there wasn't anything at that point written specifically and directed towards male caregivers. So I told her after the class was over, if she was interested in pursuing this, we could get together and see if we could put something together as a resource for male caregivers. Her name is Rhonda Travelin, and she's the co-author of this particular book and worked a lot in caregiving, running an institute for people like yourself who reached the end of their rope and need some help. And so we got together and over a course of a year and a half, ended up doing the research and writing the book called Who Says Men Don't Care? A Man's Guide to Balanced and Guilt-Free Caregiving. So long introduction, but that sort of puts you into the context of why I wrote the book, a little bit about what the book's about, and why it was important to write, because it was something that was needed. And it's actually done pretty well over the last, I think we wrote this 11 years ago. So it's been a popular book now for 11 years and used by thousands of men literally who are caregiving. So.
Well, and I think that's fantastic that there's, kind of a differentiation between male caregiving and female caregiving, because while some things it's interrelated, right?
For sure.
The emotional toll, the physical toll on relationships and stuff like that. But there is a unique aspect to male caregiving now there's more information, but at the time you wrote that, there wasn't anything out there.
No. And I think some of the differences that I've seen, at least in my research and also in my own experiences, is that men care more about outcomes. Women, I think, care more about process, and that's one of the differences. Mm-hmm. I think men are a little bit more abrupt in terms of how they present information. I think women are more softer in terms of how they often present information. I think men oftentimes don't really care what the situation is. They see it as a problem and they want to solve the problem, get the problem solved. Women see it as more complex, I think, in some ways, and know that there's layers that need to be dealt with. And so those are some of the differences that we talk about in the book. But I think they're real. And for someone who's being cared for, it helps to know that is because usually in an informal setting, it's usually a man caring for a woman. Now, it could be the man's mother, could be a spouse, and there's a big difference between caring for your spouse and caring for your mother or your grandmother or whoever it is, your daughter, whoever it is that you're caring for. But I do think that it helps to understand what those differences are to make the caregiving experience better and improved. So.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And you're another book idea, because you're like, I don't need any more book ideas, but when I first started as a social worker working in long-term care and helping families sort out care options way back then, back then, families, the residents that I had in the nursing homes and assisted living had 8, 10, 12 kids, because that's
Hmm.
how big families used to be.
Right.
But families aren't big like that anymore. And a lot of us, like I'm included in that, I didn't have kids. So
Right.
like who's gonna be our caregivers as singles as
Hmm.
we age, who's gonna be our caregivers? And another thing I think is interesting is just the only child, the people that
Hmm.
only had one child. And I think about my male, the sons that have come to me for aging planning, because they're like, I don't know what to do with my mom. We've never had a great relationship, as an example. We've never had a great relationship, and now she needs actual physical care, and I don't feel comfortable toileting her and showering her and all of that kind of stuff. So there's just all these, you know, feelings. It's all about feelings and family dynamics, and like, what do we do? And most of us kids want what's best for our parents. We want them
Hmm.
to be safe and happy, but we don't always know what that looks like.
Right. And there's an obligation we feel because our parents
Took care of us.
worked very hard to make sure that we had a better life in some ways than they did. And so when they're at a position where we're at a better position to help them, there's a lot of feelings of guilt about not being able to do that. And also, we've traveled. Our generation has gone all over the country where in the early
Yeah,
part of the century, people stayed at home. They stayed
yeah,
around in their neighborhoods. And so, but now the kids are off. If even with 2 or 3 kids, they're off living in different parts of the country. So that adds another complexity. And a lot of them are working. And so they have their own families in some cases, and they have to do that. And it's called the whole sandwich generation of caregivers, is are
yeah.
people that are caring for their own family and also caring for their parents. So all of these issues are very complex, and they involve a wide range and variety of feelings that sometimes, what we found in the research, and what I found talking to a lot of male caregivers, is that even having another man to talk to about
Mhm.
these issues becomes important. And I also found out that a lot of male caregivers don't like to go to support groups
Right.
because they feel like there aren't a lot of men in those support groups. Most of them are women that are in the support groups. And so there's that too, that having raised up and being more aware that there are male caregivers hopefully will also enable those caregivers to connect with each other and be able to talk to each other as men, because there's a certain kind of communication you have man to man that you don't have talking man to woman. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I agree completely. When you talk about, what is the plan B? What's the
plan
plan B
B,
look
the
like?
plan B is what we call, and what I called, a tipping point. So it's the point at which you reach this tipping point where you're not able to do what you really wanted to do as a caregiver. In other words, you reach a point where it's too much. It's just, you're not capable. I had a psychologist friend one time that told me that the human being can take a certain number of points. And
Mhm.
some episodes in our lives have more points than others, like moving, for example, or a death in the family, or coming down with a severe illness or something. All of those add points to you. And at some point, the points become too much for you to deal with
Yep.
it. No matter how strong you are, no matter how capable you are, no matter how educated you are, you just can't deal with it anymore. And so one of the things that we included in the book was a 15-point scale of yes and no answers that has been used since the book has been written. And we saw it in a variety of places. I've seen it as an academic being used, and hopefully it came from the book, that it would make some sense to people. But if you answer those questions honestly, you arrive at a certain number of points, and those points would dictate whether or not you are at a situation where you need to say, I can't do this anymore. So I should have in my pocket a plan B for when I can't do this. And a lot of people don't, especially men, don't like to admit that they can't do something. I mean,
Right.
that's a hard thing to admit, that you failed. And so, but what we talk about in the book and what I've talked about when I've spoken about this is that having the plan B in place, not sometimes you wouldn't never have to use it, but if you do have to use it, it's better to have it in place and have it done in calm as opposed to having it done in crisis, because then the plan B becomes chaotic. And then as you're going out here, you're going over there, you're trying to figure out what to do, as opposed to starting out with a plan B, knowing that you might need it. Then you're in a much better position. Then you know sort of where to go, who to call. They'll know to call you, if they need some help. But they need to do that early on in the caregiving process, not waiting until that reaches a crisis. And so I think that's sort of what I mean by having a plan B. And that part of that is where you really need help. Sometimes you need to know what kind of resources are available, who is there to help you as a caregiver. And that's why your work is, and the work that you're doing is so incredibly valuable, because we need to have, we talked before about cloning you, so that there was like 15 of you out there doing the work that you're doing, because it's so important. And people need to have that, need to know about that and have access to that kind of help in order to construct their plan Bs. And I think that's what you do a lot. You might not call it that, but that's what you do.
That's an aging plan.
That's an aging plan, right?
And you're 100% spot on. I use the They're at Burden interview, which is a caregiver burnout assessment tool. And almost all of our clients, again, it's the sons and daughters who come to us for an aging plan because they are burned out. And I call it the caregiver snowball. It starts out feeling manageable and doable until it isn't. I was just the call before this one, I was on a call with a daughter who's spending 24/7 with her mom because her mom is starting to show some memory impairment. She's got a lot of anxiety. She fell once, and so now she's afraid to move and walk around and stuff like that. And so she's like, I don't know what else to do for mom. I already took early retirement and now I'm living with her, and it's just, now it's not working at all. And they kind of get, families do these types of things all the time because they're in constant motion with caregiving, and they make knee-jerk reactions. And she's like, now I'm 70 years old and I need to get a job because I don't know what else I'm supposed to do, but I can't not work. So we talk about that aging plan. And when we do that, the caregiver burnout, almost all of the families are in that severe burden range. They score very high. And so that's why we do these podcasts. And that's why I was excited to meet you and hear what you're doing, because you're doing such incredible work. And our goals and missions align, because we're trying to educate consumers to say, let's put that plan in place before you find yourself in crisis, because then family relationships are going to be very strained. If you're overwhelmed now, it's only going to get worse. And then to find out in crisis mode when mom's in the hospital and she was the caregiver to dad with dementia, then to find out that they didn't have their estate documents in order, and now you're having to spend 30 grand on conservator and guardianship paperwork because you didn't have estate documents and done prior. That's part of that aging plan. But where are you going to live? We know moms and dads want to age in place at home, but it's not always feasible. So talk about that plan B, or what we call the aging plan. It's like, here's what care options are available to you now. Here's what home care is going to cost. Here's the pros and cons of aging in place at home. But we really need to have mom and dad on the waiting list of 2 or 3 different care communities proactively, so that mom doesn't end up in whatever facility has an open bed, because now staying at home is no longer feasible.
Right. And remember that all of that, if you're doing it in crisis, puts tremendous stress on the caregiver. And so the stress can result in the fact that caregiver can have themselves incur some very serious illnesses, and their immune system goes down if they're completely stressed all the time. And it's the stress that basically, if you can't take care of yourself and have the ability of staying healthy yourself, you can't really help the other person. And that's why it's so important to, one of the things that I say in the book is that you really have to be sort of selfish in a way. You have to be selfish in terms of looking out for yourself as a caregiver and taking the time to get away from that caregiving role, finding other ways of getting support so that you can refresh yourself and become, and we call the book A Man's Guide to Balanced and Guilt-Free Caregiving. And so try to describe a little bit in the book. There's a whole chapter on what does a balanced and guilt-free caregiving male look like, and what kind of situation can they be in. And of course, it's different. And one of the distinctions we make in the book is if you're dealing with chronic care as opposed to acute care, two different kinds of care. But even recognizing that early on is really important, because it can help set you in the right direction for the kind of caregiving that you want to do. So, you know, those are some of the things that I think are important in the book in terms of what the book gives you. But I think the most important thing in the book is that it's written in the language that men, it's not an academic book. It's not a soft book. It's a very straightforward book written, I think, you know, as a man would want to write to another man. And that, you know, that I think is one of the real strengths of the book.
Where could people get this? Where could they get the book?
On Amazon. It's available on Amazon. It's real easy to get. You just go and say, "Who says men don't care?" and it should pop up right away and on Amazon. So people should be able to get it very easily. And the other thing that we added that's kind of a unique thing in the book is I also talk about different generations of male caregivers. Like I talk about the techno-virtual male caregiver, that's part of the younger generation of caregivers. Talk about the angry and lone wolf caregiver, which is the older caregiver. Talk about the managing caregiver, which is basically the boomer generation. And the worker caregiver, which is basically a little bit a little bit older than boomers. So that's another thing that had never been done before in caregiving, was looking at it from a generational perspective. I think you can also look at it that way from a women's point of view too. That's interesting. If you put that lens onto women caregivers, I think you'll find some interesting things that might not have come out before, looking at it through looking at different generations of women caregivers. So
yeah, and it's, you know, the work that you're doing is just incredibly important, and you know, it's good to be able to have resources out there for all of these families. And you know, your book is so informative and educational and man-to-manish, you know, so to speak, which was the which was the intent.
Which was the intent, right?
Yeah, you know, and we talked about, you know, the stress of caregiving without an aging plan. I say this literally every single day to every family that I'm on the phone with or on Zoom with. Caregiving and aging can be a positive experience if we have an aging plan. If we're talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of what to expect throughout the aging and dementia progression journey, and let's talk about end of life and what does that look like. And you know, so we're both out there marching to the beat of the same drum, trying to get families to say, hey, let's learn about this and be proactive with putting a plan together before that crisis happens. You know, the people that had major strokes last Thursday didn't wake up thinking, oh, I think I'm going to have a major stroke today.
Exactly, right.
But that's what happens. And so when we say crisis, because I know we throw out crisis all the time, but I don't know if sometimes the general consumer knows what we're talking about when we say crisis. We're saying when you're thrust into a position of having to make big decisions quickly on behalf
under
of
stress
or someone else, under stress, big decisions quickly. That's not the time when you need to, that's not when you want to be Googling, like, what do I do now? Because Google will only get you so far.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So let's all work together now and make sure that you all as a family have the best possible aging and caregiving journey. So Jim, it's always a delight. You and I could probably talk all day long because we're just cut from the same cloth here.
Well, thank you for having me too. And I hope people will take a look at the book, and I think they'll find it, men will find it interesting, but I think women will find it interesting too, because it'll help them prepare in case they have a male caregiver. They'll know a little bit better about where they're coming from. So
Well, and from even a marital or spousal partner perspective, if you're the wife and your husband is the primary caregiver to his aging parents, I think as women, we would definitely benefit from reading that book too,
Mhm.
because we're like, oh, we didn't even think about this or that, right?
Right, right.
So it's a book for everyone. It's meant for men, but it's a book for all of us to read.
Yes.
So
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
thank you for all that you do, Jim, and for all that I know you have a bunch of projects in the works as well. So
Well, and you too. I thank you for your work, and it's a mutual admiration society. So thank you.
so thank you again for being the guest today. And again, you can find the book on Amazon, so don't be afraid to order that. If you have questions about aging planning and care right services and family meetings, you can reach out to us on the website carerightinc.com, and we offer a 30-minute free to you consult to learn more about your situation and how we can help you. So thank you, everyone. Be well and be safe out there.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into the Care Right podcast. We hope today's discussion has provided you with valuable insights. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with others who might find it helpful. Remember, Care Right is more than just a podcast. It's a community dedicated to supporting family caregivers with comprehensive care planning, crisis management, and resources for every stage of aging. Stay connected with us for future episodes as we continue to explore essential topics in aging planning, elder care, and financial planning. Until next time, take care, plan wisely, and remember, you're not alone in your caregiving journey.